Hi, everybody. This is MichaelZagami's company Lazarus and the industry Alpha MarkStrat final presentation. So to start us off, a little background on the name Lazarus. We named our company Lazarus because we knew we'd start off really slow and we would rise over time and finish really strong. And that's exactly what happened with our company. That's not exactly true as to why we named the company Lazarus, but it was true that we did kind of live up to that name's billing. The first two periods, period 2 and period 3, we actually decreased in share price and we kind of looked a little bit dead. We were focusing and clinging to the success of one of our products, and the rest of our portfolio was just really poorly positioned for the market and the intended segments. But we righted the ship and we figured out what we needed to do differently. We started to see smaller increases from period 3 onward, but then really from 4, 5, and 6, we got some really good momentum. 72% increase from period 3 to period 6, putting us at the second highest SPI amongst the competition. And another metric here, we ended with a 20% total market share, which was also the second highest rank. And I think that's even more significant and telling given the fact that the highest market share was Rocket at 39%, and that left 61% for the rest of the group, and we commanded a really significant portion of that. A few really of the key components as to why we were successful, where we were successful. The first and foremost, the true MVP of our portfolio was Loop, which kept us profitable from week to week and really ended up as the strongest product in our portfolio. $40 million in revenue, $20 million in brand contribution, and was the number 2 product in the professional segment. Then came Lock, which was a sort of an underdog story. It started off with the first 5 periods as a really negative contribution to our portfolio, but with some fine-tuned R&D and a little bit of momentum, where we saw actually in period 5 a doubling of our brand perception and brand awareness and purchase intention, I should say. That doubling kind of gave us momentum and really said, well, if we just advertise what we've got here a little bit more heavily, we're going to see a huge uptick in this product's performance. And true to form, it ended with $27 million in revenue, $7 million in brand contributions, and was actually the number 1 product in the saver segment. And then there's Low Ride, which was an interesting story in that we were debating whether or not the product for the professional segment was going to be Loop or Low Ride. Loop had always been, in our eyes, the high earners product, whereas Low Ride was going to be the professionals product. But by the time we had finished R&D in Low Ride, we saw that Loop actually had a much higher purchase intention in the professional segment. And the R&D we had done, actually due to the evolutions in the perception maps, really geared Loop to be the professional segment and told us that Low Ride needed to be our high earner segment. And by the end, Low Ride became a $13 million in revenue, $4 million in brand contribution, and actually the number 2 product in the high earner segment. Now, we did have a doghouse, and that doghouse was occupied by our products Loy and Lord. Loy was a solid product in that it was the number 1 product in the Explorer segment, but because of the fact that there was like sort of a choking effect within that segment, in that the market size just diminished altogether, and by the end was almost non-existent. We really didn't have a positive brand contribution, $7 million in revenue, but the 2 contributing factors to that negative brand contribution were the market size decrease and the fact that we were a little bit underestimating how many of our competitors were just going to vacate that segment altogether. So we kept our price way lower than it should have been, and it was actually the bare minimum allowed by the MarkStrat simulation. We probably could have raised it quite a bit, created a little bit more tolerance for it, and then obviously turned that brand contribution around into a positive. And then with Lord, this was a last-minute offering. We ran some sort of desperation R&D, realizing that the shopper segment was going to be one of the most significant segments in the entire market. We had nothing geared toward the shopper segment. the first couple periods of our exercise here, we had some failed and botched R&D exercises, just things that we didn't really understand about it. And by the time we finally got it and got the budget to do it, it was a little bit too late. But we did feel strong that if in period 7 or 8, if we were able to continue that far, we thought that Lord could have been a really strong performing product in the shopper segment. So a few other success factors. We had products in every single one of the segments. So we were spread thin in one regard, but I'll get back to that concept of spreading thin or spreading thick. In a subsequent slide, I'll touch on that. But competitive awareness, we really focused on understanding where our competitors were investing, especially the industry leaders. So the group Rocket, we kind of focused on where they were being very successful, and we looked at where they were positioning themselves, and we tried to position ourselves quite a bit better. And we also tried to watch the evolution of each segment and where they were going from a desired feature standpoint. And every time we would run R&D, we'd make sure we'd be a step ahead of where we thought that trend was going to go. Toward the end of the exercise, we started to focus a little bit more, and we should have done it earlier on, but definitely should have done it earlier on, especially regarding the botched up shoppers R&D that we had. Had we known that the shoppers and the savers were going to be such a large component of the market share, we would have done a little bit more R&D and a ton more advertising earlier on. But toward the end of the exercise, we did focus on that and started to choke out the budget associated with the product Loy, which was geared toward the explorers market, as well as some of the products for the professionals and high earners. Now, semantic and multi-dimensional advertising, this was really the big learning for us as we went on, knowing that when you had to fine-tune some of your advertising efforts, focus on that semantic. When you needed to sort of create a better awareness and a better perception of the entire product, do the multi-dimensional advertising and focus on those really high value levers for each segment. A few key takeaways in the simulation as well as in the real life setting. Start out fast. Make sure you understand what your market need is for each segment, and run your R&D projects early. Make sure you get into each market and each segment as early as possible. And smart, and that's an obvious statement, but really what I mean by that is, once you know what your product does and once you know what your consumers need, hit it hard. Double your advertising. Don't be afraid to spend. And then individualize your products so you have one-to-one product to segment targeting. And this is really important because it helps you focus your advertising budget and not spread it out and have it be, actually geared toward people that are not going to even buy the product in the first place. So to kind of dig in a little bit more and put a finer point on what we learned from this simulation, in regards to segmentation and targeting, watch market evolution. So really see how the market size is shifting. Now pay attention to how the consumer's preferences are shifting, and look for perception voids. So where the competition is not really fulfilling a need, make sure that you fulfill that need, and then advertise heavily on it. And again, that concept of spread thin or spread thick, well, make sure you've got, again, spreading your products to reach all the markets and having one for each market, but spread yourself thick when it comes to the advertising associated with each product. Make it the sort of highest investment once you run your R&D, and don't look back. We saw that by the end, the most successful company, Rocket, was basically doubling our advertising budget, but in large part because they knew what their products did and they knew what the consumers wanted, and then they just didn't look back and they just advertised. A few things about product in general. So obviously it's key to understand that R&D. Make sure you're nailing down the perceptions and the mapping early on, as early as possible. Pay attention to your feasibility budgets. Now, we had a botched up a couple experiments early on, which really set us back, especially with regards to getting a shopper's product up and running. We really didn't capitalize as much as we should have. We actually underestimated the budget associated with it, and really could have completed the R&D project in 1 week, but it actually spanned a couple weeks just because we didn't allocate enough resources toward it. We should have actually taken budget away from some of those negative contribution products and focused a little more on R&D for prospective products. So a couple other things, understanding about features. So looking at what our competition does from a feature perspective, and especially those really successful competitors in a given segment, and looking at which features seem to mean the most, and then really target advertising, well, certainly R&D to start, but advertising afterward on those feature sets. And then always monitoring and staying really close to how far away the evolution of the desired features are getting from your current product's brand characteristics. So running multiple R&Ds through the course of this simulation for a given product wouldn't be such a bad idea, given how much even over the course of 6 periods the sort of perceptions changed. So when it comes to price, we had a few really key learnings. One was that we really need to fine-tune our understanding of how each product's margin plays into the brand contribution. So those really low-cost products need to be sold at a much higher clip and volume to be a positively contributing product in our portfolio. Also understanding the segment tolerance for price. So, we saw that even in the professionals and high earners segment, the professionals started off with a lower tolerance for price than the high earners, but that actually shifted and was actually reversed by the end of it. Now, that means that every week we had to basically shift our pricing strategy. Balance high purchase intention with price assignment. This is one area where we really could have capitalized a little bit better. When we have a high purchase intention, we knew we had a little bit more leeway when it came to a price for a given product, especially outside of the savers segment. And then always obviously monitoring where our competition sits from a price perspective and trying to outmaneuver them when it comes to the evolution for a given segment and their desired feature set for price in particular. Now, when it comes to place, we definitely learned in the middle of this simulation the importance of tailoring and targeting your distribution for the given segmentation. Now, once we realized that we were going to have one product for each segment, it became really easy to understand how to distribute. And by period 4 or 5, we had it down to pretty much a science as to what the mix needed to be. And then always analyzing and looking at how our competition is distributing really gives us an understanding for whether or not they're going to be successful. And that tells us whether or not we should distribute a little bit more, or produce a little bit more, or if we should look at it as a really competitive situation. Now, there were a few scenarios where we noticed that our competition was not distributing their products according to the segment's desired shopping habits. So that really told us that we were going to be able to ratchet up even more than you would expect from a previous market share perspective, ratchet up our production, knowing that the competition was not going to be able to capitalize with their distribution behavior. So when it comes to promotion, a few really key takeaways. When we had a research budget, we were actually just wasting it when we were running general awareness advertising, and realized later on toward period 4 and 5 that really made no sense to use a research budget when you were just raising general awareness. So we shifted gears there. And then a few other things. When you needed a quick perception lift, we used the multi-dimensional scaling because it kind of spread out the advertising budget across multiple different fronts. And when you needed a fine-tuned perception shift, we focused on semantic scaling. And that happened a lot when we noticed a perception void for a given segment on a given feature set. And then, of course, advertise heavily on the well-perceived products. Once you know they're well-perceived and those purchase intentions are high, then just go heavily on general awareness. So that basically wraps up our performance. We really thought it was a productive and ultimately a successful experience. Thank you.